You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
Today we are coming from you from the comfortable confines of our homes, though we would both wish we were in St. Louis and Denver watching baseball, but it is spring training, so like we're one step closer to making that a reality.
I am in downtown Denver. Look behind me.
As your head floats in and out of picture because it's a white head, so it's as we begin today's podcast, we're going to jump into lectionary reading is kind of our semi-tradition, and looking at Mark, the gospel reading, Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. And so I'll let Zach kick us off by reading that, and then we'll have our discussion from there.
So here from the Gospel of Mark. Then Jesus began to teach his disciples, the human one must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed, and then, after 3 days, rise from the dead. He said this plainly, but Peter took hold of Jesus and scolded him, began to correct him. Jesus turned and looked at his disciple and then sternly corrected Peter. Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts. After calling the crowd together with his disciples, Jesus said to them, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. And all who want to save their lives will lose them. But all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their life? What would people give in exchange for their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words is in this unfaithful and sinful generation, the human one will be ashamed of that person when he comes in the Father's glory with the holy angels. And so, Matt, there's a lot in that. We could really break it up into two different sections, but what really initially sticks out to you in that passage?
Well, when we were looking at this to begin with, I think the one that just stuck with me is like, here you have Jesus. If Jesus doing his teaching, he's predicting his death again, and they obviously struggled with that. Like when a leader does that, nowadays we'd probably be attempting to commit them. There'd be some things like that, but Peter pulls him aside, all right, Jesus, stop that, bad Jesus. That's kind of how I see it. It's I see Peter pulling him aside, bad Jesus, don't say that. We don't need that right now, Jesus. I love this line that you're not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts. And there's a lot. You're right. There's a lot that we can unpack here. And I just love that whole thing. There's obviously talk about how do we pay attention to God, how we pay attention to God when he's calling us. There's a lot we can unpack there. But I don't know. I just like that. Get behind me, when he rebukes him, and not only rebukes him, he says, get behind me, Satan. So he's calling Jesus the devil. There's just so much fun to unpack here.
It is. And I agree. I love this relationship between Jesus and Peter. One that Peter feels confident and comfortable enough, in my mind, to grab Jesus by the arm and be like, hey, come over here. Let's sidebar it for a second. Because what you're saying is, dude, like you said, we don't need that right now. This is, what are you really saying? Let's pull it back a little bit, Jesus, right? And like I said, I think that lends to the relationship that Peter and Jesus have, that's maybe deeper than, or more intimate, or more personal than the other disciples had with the relationship. Or it just points to the writers of the gospel always picking on Peter of Peter not ever understanding what Jesus says, right? Take it for what you will. But I think it's interesting because Jesus does this often throughout the Gospels and says, I'm not going to be here forever. Here's how it's going to go down. And he's constantly pushing the reality and the narrative of, you're going to take over. Here's how you lead. And at least as Methodist pastors, that's something, or at least for me, that's what I've learned in coming into a new appointment of saying that reality. I'm not going to be here forever. So how do we do this together? How do we put you in a place where we can move forward? And you can move forward without me when I'm no longer your pastor, which is a fine line to equate yourself to Jesus in those moments. But it's that same leadership style of, how do we do this together? How are we in relationship together? How do we move forward? What happens? Because we're not all going to be here forever.
Well, wouldn't you say that that's been kind of one of our downfalls within the church, is that we live in this idea that we're going to do this forever? And so like I can't tell you the number of times where I've had to hire someone on staff and the conversation is like, well, how long are they going to be here? I'm like, that's not a question. That's not a question we can ask, because they don't know. I mean, we don't know. I mean, even though we're in an itinerant clergy, the struggle is real. Like, something may happen or something may change. Like, we live in a world where right now, where the we don't know how the denomination is going to shake out. So we don't. I mean, that's not. I mean, we can't. I think living in that reality of like, let's do good now and worry about tomorrow. And like right now, there's a lot that we need to do. And I think that's why like Jesus shifts the conversation then. Like, so they have this conversation with Peter, and then he like, all right, so I'm going to use this as a teaching moment. And so like he has that great line, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And all who want to save their lives will lose them. But all those who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. And, like, I think about like that whole denial, like really to follow Jesus means we deny our life and follow Jesus. We deny the things that put Jesus at the, back burner. We are called to put Jesus at the forefront of everything we do in our lives. And yet, like, I see that being the problem, not only within the church, but like within the world, like, and I think, obviously it'd be easy if everybody would come to Jesus and,
Right. Well, and I think the misconception of that text is often, well, if you're not flogging yourself and suffering for Christ, then you're not doing it well enough, right? And I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here, but he's just pointing again to that reality of, this is what it means. To follow me means there's going to be sacrifice. It's going to be hard. There's going to be things that we all have to give up, because it takes our attention away from this good news. It takes our attention away from the people around us in our faith and things like that. And so how do we lose our lives to those distractions? How do we lose our lives to those temptations to move further away rather than come closer? But I've heard too many times, well, you got to give your life up for Christ and suffer and flog yourself and have guilt and shame. And it's like, I don't think that's what Jesus is getting at here.
I haven't really ever heard the more, that side of things. What I've heard it used is like this idea of kind of glorifying the cross. And that's not what it's about. It's really about, that suffering component is there. Jesus is adamant, and I think it's that cost of discipleship that this grace and things is not cheap, that there is a cost to this discipleship, as Bonhoeffer points to in his book Cheap Grace. Like the cost of discipleship. Like, and I think what's happened, especially in the American church, I feel like we've done it where we've taken into that consumeristic Western idea that bigger is better, and I understand that. Like, I really do believe that Jesus didn't have that mindset. I really do believe that Jesus was more of the mustard seed to allow it to have natural growth, but the connection is called to is to have a connection towards God and our neighbors. And like,
yeah. And that's what I think, that's exactly the line that we're going here, is this connection of who we are, and this coming closer to God in these moments, that it won't be easy. Jesus constantly points to that, that following me is not easy. It's not sunshines and rainbows, it's hard. It's hard work, because it often is going to put us in a place that is tough, for many reasons.
well, and that's why I think that's why this is a good text for the second week of Lent. Because like the first week, it's kind of like, hey, like Jesus was baptized. And then like this week, it's like, all right, so now you got to get, like, now that you're in, understand, like, and that's the funny thing about this. It's like, now that you're in, here's what the real cost is. Now, are you really in? Like, because understand that, like, from this point on, in Mark's gospel, it's kind of, I always like to think of it as the downward trend to the cross. And we're really like, from transfiguration on, like that's when Jesus' focus shift. But like Jesus is really setting him up for that. That's why he tells him this 3 times in Mark's gospel, is to really understand that when that moment happens and they go through that time, they'll be like, oh yeah, he was talking about this the whole time. And so like,
right.
I think it's a good thing to reflect on it and being aware of those moments for that. And like, where are we paying attention to where God's at work in our lives? And are we really paying attention to it, or are we just kind of going through the motions?
Right. Well, and that's what I like to point to for Lent every year, but especially this year, because it just feels like we've been in a perpetual season of Lent for the last year, since last Lent, of allow yourself to be present in that humanity, whatever it is, celebration or grief or anything in between, be present in that. And I think that's when Jesus tells us to count the costs, it often points to that humanity of, are we being present in who we are and how we're feeling? And sometimes that's heavy and it's full of grief, and sometimes that's full of celebration. And I don't think that's any different here. Of here's what it looks like: be present in the things that make you feel human. And is following me scary? Yeah. But is it fruitful and faithful in a lot of ways? Yeah. And so he kind of lays it all out here of, here's what this looks like. And it's hard, but the reward is much greater in grace and love than not, right? And I don't like talking about rewards of faith and things like that, because it's a slippery slope. But
well, I mean, I think
an interesting conversation.
I think the rewards of faith are, it's not a reward, it's a journey. And that the reward is really the journey. When you can look back and you can see where God's been at work, even those times that you didn't recognize it. Oh, look, it's that big Methodist word, prevenient grace. But like, I think here's what happens with prevenient grace, is that like we get held back onto those moments, like, oh, I remember that moment, God, that word. And we miss out on the moments that we're like passing by. And I think
that I think that's what you see with Peter here, right? Because we have Peter in such high regard, and yet we constantly find him being like, "Hey, Jesus, come here, tell me more. I don't understand." Or, "Dude, don't say that."
Well, and I think it's because Jesus, like, I think this Peter struggles living in the moment of what's happening and what's going on, and then like he's either too much of the past or too much in the future, and like we all get that way. I'm not saying it's not something we all do. And so I think, like, really, like, to think about the scripture and where we can land today, I think it's really one, paying attention when we're walking. Are we following Jesus, or are we not? I mean, and I think that's a great question. Are we following Jesus, or are we not? And what does it really mean to follow Jesus? It means to surrender your life and follow the way that Jesus showed us to live. Like, I mean, I really think that's and that's a hard thing. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I think that's a good thing to reflect on in the second Sunday in Lent.
Right. Well, and it goes back to exactly that point you made of, this is a journey. It's it's not a moment to moment thing. And so, we have this ebb and flow, and it's that journey throughout our lifetime of following Christ. And it's easy, like Peter, to get caught up in those singular moments of, oh, crap, And so, and I like that that's where they point to here also. And Jesus uses it as a teaching moment to be like, all right, we just saw Peter.
Yeah.
Let's learn from this.
Well, and the thing I love about the Gospel of Mark is that in Mark's treatment of the disciples, he's not kind to them. The author is not kind to them, and I'm actually okay with that. I would much rather have that than be like these. Look at these disciples; they were all perfect in following Jesus. They got every word, because that's usually what's presented. That's right. Not. I mean, we've been in church work to know that that's not the case. And so
no, but it helps us find that humanity in them too, and the common thread of, oh, I feel like that too, or I've said that, or I've wondered, or I've doubted, or that's helpful. It's helpful to see that in the people who walked with Jesus.
So we have fallen into one of those preacher loops of multiple endings today. But I think the real question really is, are asking yourself really and reflecting. It's a great season of Lent to do that. Is, are you really following Jesus? Are you giving your life to really following Jesus and putting Jesus first in your life and living the way that he showed us live? I think that's a great way to land today. And so with that in mind, we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com. We've got a lot of great content, we got some really cool merch that you can pick up for gifts and all sorts of fun things. As we enter that season of ordination time, buy your bearded pastor, whether they have a beard or not, a bearded theologian's gear, And so we encourage you to do that. And we thank you for listening today. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
First, guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.